You're going to get some good press, some bad press. You're going to make some really good decisions, some not ideal decisions. You're going to have competition. You're going to have a lot of headwinds, and the ability to kind of maintain focus and continue to persevere through all those different headwinds and, continue to like rise above, I think is what really differentiates.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with great pleasure that I have my friend and just frankly an amazing leader, entrepreneur in your own way, and just individual who's seen essentially everything happen in Silicon Valley over the past 20 years, Jason Mok, to the call.
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, to give a little bit of background, Jason is currently the head of startups and strategic partnerships at Brex. He, before that, was at Andreessen Horowitz as operating partner and GM of their seed fund, and also doing, of course, a lot of partnerships there. And then he spent, I think it was about 17 or so years almost 17 years at Silicon Valley Bank. So you saw everything that happened there, all the great things that SVB built, and probably plenty of their failures. And then I guess in a sense, we're lucky enough to be on the sidelines when everything came crashing down, as painful as that was to see something you spent so long building. But you're really someone who's kind of seen it all, including working with me on my early startups that also failed. So you've really seen all the things.
Yeah, no, it's been crazy. One, to say that it's been 20 years, but two, I've definitely seen some peaks and valleys and some things that happened along the way. And again, I don't know that I've seen it all, but I definitely have seen a lot. And I'm looking forward to diving in and chat more about everything.
Yeah. So the question I'd like to start with, Jason, is as someone who, not an entrepreneur yourself directly, but as someone who's seen so many entrepreneurs, how do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, you've invested in them, you've funded them. What does excellence mean in your mind?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. Loaded question as well. I look at entrepreneurial excellence as someone who has a vision and is able to take people with them along to execute on that vision and do so in a way where you can suspend disbelief along the way. Because I think some of the hardest problems to solve and some of the biggest opportunities out there, not everyone can see.
Totally agree. But I think there's lots and lots and lots of founders who would say they have all of those things, yet still fail. So to push a little deeper, what are the elements that really stand out, right? So you're at Brex. Brex is probably a great example of a company who's done this pretty well, right? Like, you have founders who, I think their first thing basically, were they even out of college when they started Brex? I'm not even sure, but like super early, like so early in their careers, started Brex and had become one of the iconic companies out there. But what did they do that was different than all the other straight out of college founders or super experienced founders who haven't been able to pull off a company that now is multi-billion valuation?
Yeah, well, I would give Enrique and Pedro a ton of credit. I mean, they're in a class of their own. They actually started and sold a company in Brazil before they joined Stanford and then dropped out of Stanford. So they had that start. So like, even if you go way back in time, like, there's that brilliance, but, I would say, to kind of leverage what I've seen, or not leverage, but just more so take a little bit of a playbook of like what I've seen here that really separates and like drives entrepreneurial excellence, beyond vision, like peeling it back and like what maybe separates, the best of the best from the rest of the pack is perseverance. I think there are a lot of opportunities along the way of building a company. You're going to hit a ton of walls. Not everything's going to go your way. You're going to get some good press, some bad press. You're going to make some really good decisions, some not ideal decisions. You're going to have competition. You're going to have a lot of headwinds, and the ability to kind of maintain focus and continue to persevere through all those different headwinds and, continue to like rise above, I think is what really differentiates, I'd say one, Enrique, Pedro, and a lot of the team here. And then I would say that for like all other like amazing founders who are at other scale companies that are continuing to scale and grow. I do think that like there are a lot of things that happen along the way, both professionally, both corporate level, and then also personally, that can get in the way of, if all things kind of fell perfectly in your lap, like, yes, you could build the best company, but that's not how things go. And that's not how life goes. And so I think a lot of things get in the way. I think perseverance, resilience, and an ability to maintain focus and maintain positivity and confidence go a long ways. And I think it's very understated in our industry.
Do you think there are ways that founders can identify that for themselves? Or for you, when you think back to your days investing at Andreessen, were there ways you would identify that of founders? Is there like past success you look at, or their abilities to have that level of resilience? Like, how do you identify that in yourself? And by the way, feel free to think of your own career, right? I mean, your own career has had plenty of ups and downs and everything else. And yet not many people spend 17 years at one company. And like, if you look at your resume, it's basically like promotion after promotion after promotion after promotion, like one thing after the next, year after year after year. I'm sure it wasn't quite a straight line like that, but what is that actually like? What are those qualities that set apart people who do persevere versus ones who give up?
Great question. And one thing, like, so yeah, at A16Z, I definitely supported the investing team on, identifying those founders and supporting those founders, like after we made the investment, just as a clarification. But, I would say this, unless you know the founder beforehand, you wouldn't know the answer to that, right? And so obviously at the time you're making the investment, like you're making a bet on the founder, their background, their ability to go ahead and, does their background correlate and tie to like what they say they're going to do? Is the opportunity amazing? Are they the right person? Can they attract the talent? All the things that probably you and a lot of the other listeners here know. In terms of perseverance, I would say the thing that has stood out to me over time is like, unless you're a serial entrepreneur, like you wouldn't know, especially for a first-time founder. And I don't know that it's right to make a judgment call if you like look at someone's resume or LinkedIn and be like, oh, you started 3 companies and you spent a year at each company before you land on your 4th. Like, that's okay. You might have like started the first company and then like you quickly realized it wasn't the right thing and then you made a pivot and whatever. And so I'd say along the way, I would say this. It's really hard to know, but in the moment, like companies I worked with in the past that I think are, and I'll just use like my SVB days, Coinbase. Early on, I was working with Brian and Fred at the seed, and SVB was, I'd say, like one right there at the start and instrumental in like helping Coinbase get off the ground. And you can imagine like what everyone obviously still says and was saying, what was that 12 years ago about Bitcoin, Postmates, right? Everything getting in the way of that. There's DoorDash. There's a number of companies like Uber. All those companies. Point being is like, if you are finding friction, whether that be regulatory compliance, if you are bumping into friction, meaning excessive competition, if you are running into issues, I personally think like friction's a good thing. I think that headwinds are a good thing for the most part because it means you're onto something and you're going to try and execute on and do something that most people cannot. And so, I don't know that I have a great answer to your question other than like when I speak to a lot of founders, and you've probably been in the room, where, doing the same thing, where you have a conversation with a founder and the founder is just so bought in, so confident in what they're doing, the problem they're solving, and the space that they're tackling. It doesn't mean that may ultimately be a successful company, but I have so much respect for founders that aren't easily swayed, aren't easily dissuaded, or aren't easily manipulated into anything but their own conviction, their own vision. I love being in conversation with founders, and like it's always fun to kind of like poke holes and play devil's advocate. And we're like, oh, devil's advocate. Let me go ahead and say this. What happens at X? And like most of these great founders like have a great, they've got their even keel, they've got a strong perspective, they're great listeners, but they kind of like stay the lane on what they believe in, and they're resilient. And a lot of things can happen to get in the way of that vision, and they're going to maintain focus. And so I think a lot of it to me is just kind of, a lot of that's tried and true and tested, along the journey. And it's hard, I think, identify up front, but I could totally be wrong on that.
What have you seen when you think through like the companies you've worked for where the founders or it's led the right way? Like, so even SVB obviously was led really well for a long time and there's some failures there. And it's kind of be curious, like what even leads to coming to that to essentially implode overnight? And they didn't seek to. A lot of smart, well-paid people who were paid to see those things. But like at SVB, at Andreessen, at Brex, like what are the elements like, oh, like this is what great leadership, great founders look like in their actions, either the culture culture that they're setting, the team they're hiring, stuff like that.
Love the question. I think it's like, to me, clearly like authenticity in the mission and the vision. And so I'll start with like SVB, where it all revolves. I'm going to use present terms because it's still around. Mm-hmm. It all revolves around the founder and the innovation economy, right? They say the innovation economy, like we at SVB want to be on the brink and kind of lead the charge and be the kind of the force multiplier for the innovation economy. And so, Are there people there that really enjoy banking or lending or credit cards? And could they be working at a bank that didn't service tech companies and it could be, commercial real estate or some other kind of like tangential related industry. And the same for like cards and lending and whatnot. It could, but what it did is it had people who, a lot of the leadership organically grew up within SVB, right? Like a lot of the leadership started out as like associate level people, back in the day in the, kind of early 90s that ultimately grew into, senior leadership at SVB. So they owned the vision. Like they were like, why SVB was started is why they joined SVB and is why they rose up through the ranks to help carry the flag and like move SVB continually in that direction to kind of be be the prevalent partner of the innovation economy. And so if you think about that, I think what they did really well is like that vision and that value prop and that like mission was so authentic and it's so crystal clear that it attracted the right talent of other people that wanted to be a part of that. And again, it didn't attract like the random bankers who I know how to bank, I know how to lend, I know about cards, and I don't really care about the industry. It attracted people, and I say this all the time, where it's like, if you weren't going to start your own company, work at a tech company, or be a VC, then you were going to be at SVB. Because that was like your other way of being in the mix without being at one of the three that I just mentioned. And so it attracted the talent of all those, I say like amazing people who really wanted to play a role and be a partner to a founder, an entrepreneur, a founding team, a CFO, a financial partner in some way, shape, or form without directly being in the company or being at a venture firm. And I thought that was just beautiful. And I think that's just like that composition of talent. It was all people who like joined for the mission. It wasn't people who are like, I know this is going to be a 10x company in the next 15 to 20 years, or SVB is just a great logo. It was like, that's my way to go ahead and spend time with Adam Spector, Dave Spector, Heidi Zach Spector, or like, Postmates or Coinbase. Like that was my way. And I think a lot of other people's way of like joining the vision and being a part of the value prop and aligning around the mission. And I'd say the same for, like A16Z. Ben and Mark and the rest of the team have done a tremendous job of like being super clear about what the firm stands for. And they've got core values and pillars that really mean a lot. And I think everyone they hire really aligns and assimilates behind all of that. And like it exudes and everyone's an extension of Ben, Mark, and all the GPs there. And so I think that's that. And then I think you have the same here at Brex, where like there are a lot of amazing people here that come from all different backgrounds in like tech and financial services and fintech and venture and whatnot, but everyone's behind the mission, right? And so I think that talent kind of naturally, self-selects and kind of, is an extension of the founding team and of the founders of like, we're behind the mission. And I think it really goes a long ways in terms of, supporting a scale company. But I think that that's just kind of, to me, was a fun common theme, like clear founders with a clear vision, clear value prop, and a clear mission, and it's authentic. And I think that just goes a long way.
How often, for across all of those companies, how often are those founders repeating that cultural message? How often do they, where is it something that like they're saying every single person, every single hire, quarterly just team discussions, whatever it is that the company was doing to reinforce that perspective? Yeah. How often did that happen?
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. Here at Brex, so we have our all hands every 2 weeks. And we actually had today, so it's every other Wednesday. And Pedro always kicks it off, like every all hands reading our core values and our mission. So just like it's like clockwork.
That makes me feel really happy. By the way, I just have to interrupt really quickly because I did not know that, and obviously Pedro would be someone I would love to emulate and make Levy as successful as that. We do the same thing we do bi-weekly all hands. I don't read off the entire thing. I choose one part of our sort of cultural values, mission, vision, and read off one section that hopefully relates to the overall theme of that all hand. But same general idea. So I'm glad to hear that. It makes me feel like maybe I'm doing something right.
Yeah, and I think thank you. That's awesome to hear that you also do the same. And I think it's just a beautiful thing because it just reminds everyone like why we're here. It grounds the conversation. And there are some people that have been here since the beginning, and there's some people like it might be their first week.
So Jason, the question is like, what were they? How did like A16, SVB, how did they repeat or reinforce the cultural message of who they were and why they existed, and therefore why you should come into work, hopefully energized and excited every day?
Yeah, honestly, I thought a lot of that for both A16Z and SVB, very similar, happened through the tenured employees. So, I think Yeah, and it both is true at both firms, but like there are a lot of people there that have been there for a long time that were kind of there from the early days that would reinforce always doing right by the entrepreneur, always doing right by the founder, always doing, you know, first class business in a first class way, prioritizing long-term relationships, doing things that were always right for external parties. And so that would always just kind of come up in deal discussions and recognizing employees and recognizing work and review cycles, identifying how people, obviously are reenacting or living or working through their, their daily lives, within the principles of the company. And again, both is true at both firms. But a lot of that, I think Brex repeats it daily, or I'm sorry, bi-weekly, through all hands. And like it comes up, really, clearly in, review cycle time. And then I'd say like for more so like A6 Trimsy and SUB, I'd say a lot of that was just kind of like, in deal discussion and thinking through like, should we go ahead and, from a banking perspective, lending perspective, do something with this company? What will we do? Everything was just always kind of like first principles grounded, just like, are we doing right by the entrepreneur? Are we putting our best foot forward? Are we protecting them? Are we protecting us and our reputation? Are we being thoughtful? Are we doing first class business in a first class way? All those things. I just think that was just kind of like rooted in the way that we operate. And even like for Brex, it just reminded me. So I am what we call like the values interviewer for all go to market. So I'm like the final interviewer for all go to market hires, where I identify or I interview and then just kind of share what our core values are as a company, and then get your perspective as a candidate on just kind of like how you operate in that way. Do you align with the value? And then sharing ideas and thoughts and examples of like, why that value is or is not as important to you. And do you assimilate and kind of align with Brex's values? And so I think a lot of it can be, again, repeated up front. I think though more so it's woven in the fabric of like, everyday operating, right? And so it could be in the reviewing, in the review cycle and the interview cycle, and then also just kind of like daily recognition, weekly recognition, as well as reminding people just kind of like, no, when you're in a tough situation or you're thinking through a business decision, like this actually is one of our core value principles. Like this is how we would do it. And this is what's right by, XYZ partner, XYZ customer.
So a lot of questions from that. One, I want to ask you just quickly about the interviewing process and what you do there without you maybe giving away too many secrets if people are watching this, listening to this in the future who are trying to interview. But like, what are the things you look for? I mean, everyone's going to say, oh yeah, I mean, like presumably they've read over your value. I mean, I hope if they're a prepared interviewee, they've read over your values and mission.
Oh, Jason, I was hoping you would ask me that question.
Right. I love everything about Brex's vision and mission. It makes so much sense. I love your cultural values. Like what are you looking for? What do people say that's wrong? Where you're like, yep, no, definitely not a cultural fit. Like, and you're just like, boom, done, out.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a good question. And I don't mind sharing this. Is like, so I actually literally say every time I'm like, look, the obvious answer to all of this is like, yes, that's a great value. I'm more so interested in how you apply that value into things you've done in the past. And from there, honestly, I can gather from your answer whether you actually truly understand the purpose of why that value exists. So as an example, one of my favorite values is One Brex, which is this notion that everyone else's around you success is more important than yours. And ultimately, what's most important is the success of the company. And if you prioritize success of everyone else and success of the company, you too will be successful. And that's this notion of like, just, you are, a lot of us in many ways, and a lot of what we do are ICs, right? And we're like trying to make ourselves successful, but you really have to look around, have peripheral vision, and make sure that everyone else around you is successful. And ultimately, that's going to bubble up and, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so you can ask that question and share that value. And some people can go ahead and say like, yeah, I'm a total team player. And, I obviously want to make sure that like everyone around me is doing their job, because at the end of the day, like I want to win. Like I at the company want to win. And it's most important the company wins. And like, I hope that answers your question, Jason. Right. And then there's another, in my opinion, stronger answer, which is like, if I'm an SDR, right, and I'm doing some outbound and I'm starting to crush quota and I'm hitting like 150, 170, 180, 190% a month, right? Am I sharing my best practices and sequences? Like clearly I unlocked something. Clearly I found a lane. Am I like saying like, hey, everyone, this isn't just the Jason show. Like, here are my sequences. This is what I'm doing. I'd love to also learn, like maybe I can get to 200, 250 by learning something you're also doing that, I'm not doing. Like, are you sharing best practices? Are you saying like, you know what, there are opportunities over here and I'm not trying to hog them myself. And this place is all better. Like if I'm like back down to 120% of quota, but like all of us are hitting 120% of quota, then that's amazing because then, Brex is doing X, Y, Z. And so I love obviously that second answer, which is,
Yeah.
way more tactical and clear and selfless. And that's effectively what you're kind of going for in the questioning, right? Versus the like, oh yeah, like I think it's great. Like I want to make sure that Adam's successful. And like at the end of the day, like it's important that the company's successful. Like, thank you. I appreciate that. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Do you find that, like, it sounds like Brex is a pretty mature hiring process, which makes sense because you guys have a lot of employees and you've been around a long time. How does the hiring process you guys have there compare to what you saw at A16 or at SVB? Like what are the big differences, pros and cons?
Yeah, I would probably think. I mean, like again, A16Z is obviously a different animal, but no, I think that like
But I mean, they're still bringing on. I mean, A16Z, how many teammates? I mean, employees and teammates, whatever you want to call it.
probably around 500-ish or something like that.
That's what I thought. Okay, so like that's still pretty. That's a big organization in general, especially for a VC firm.
Yep.
And they have to have, like, to be that big and have it be successful. You have to.
I mean, like, look, people are using very similar tools, Greenhouse, right? Everyone's doing the screen. You open up the thing, everyone's doing a screen, and then, you assemble a panel, and everyone on the panel is supposed to ask, has a different theme that they're going after, right? And then ultimately you kind of get to the end and the panel convenes and, decides on the candidate. I'd say what's similar across the three is twofold. One is, just kind of going on the theme that we're talking about right now in terms of values is like, you know, above and beyond making sure that we're hiring the best candidate who has the right skill set to do the job effectively, right? Like I think it's beautiful and important to make sure again that like that candidate aligns with the cultural values and the mission of the company. So I'd say like across all three, Brex, Systems, SVB, like that's embedded in the interview process. And I think that, when people are, sharing the written feedback, the interviewers on the respective candidates that, they're sharing that and people are like, again, like owning those values because they're your values, right? And so I think that feedback comes loud and clear. And I think that's one thing that was consistent. The other thing that I think is super interesting is, not just hiring the best candidate for the job, but having a vision of how that person can scale within the org. And so like I think all three companies, firms are very ambitious and are very hungry for talent, and not just talent that plugs an existing hole, but that can also be a force multiplier and kind of have like some compounding effect on the ripple effect on the culture and open up new lanes of opportunity and attract additional talent and do all the things that I think, obviously hiring great talent means. And so it's this having this vision of like, do you see the ability for this person to have an effect change, 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years from now, which is kind of like the inverse of like, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I mean, or not inverse, but like it's the same question kind of asked the other way. But like, again, are you trying to plug a hole now, or do you see this person having effect or the ability to affect change beyond the scope of the current role?
Are you laying that out beforehand as like a specific, like, I think we might need someone to do X, Y, or Z in the future? Or is it instead just like, I want to hire people who can scale in a big way? Like I want people who are just overly ambitious, can scale, can grow.
I think that, and again, I think it's different for every type of role. Like, respectfully, like, there's certain roles where it's like, that's the role that you're doing. Right. And I get that. But you got to be happy with that role. Right. We don't want you to like churn and burn and do that for a year and then leave. Cause like that's a big tax on the company as well. But more so like for certain roles. And like, again, I've just kind of been in those business units, right? Whether it's sales, BD, partnerships, the roles that I had at A16 and then at SQB on the relationship management side, those are roles where like you want to hire the best talent to scale within the org because you just want an army of those people long term, and you want to have a bench, right? Because anywhere you go that is like an SVB, A16T, or even a Brex, like they're making an investment in you, especially in those roles, right? And those investments obviously have to pay out over time, and you want tenure out of those people.
Yeah, no, 100%. What have you found as the best way to keep folks with that like keep people around? How do you keep people happy long term? How do you keep them incentivized to stick around?
I think that, like, look, I think the obvious answer that, people listening will want to hear is like, well, you have to have, certain retention mechanisms on like, comp or stock or, accelerator investment, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah, but I would call it
And
BS.
I'm like, that's like in everyone's back pocket. And I know that's not the answer you're going for, but like, I'm just gonna like say like, that's that. And you move that to the side, and those people are going to do what they're going to do, right? Those people are going to do what they're going to do. I think at the end of the day, like for Brex, as an example, like you have to still, and I go back to the founder, like you are an extension of the founders, and you have to have alignment and continued confidence in the vision. Like, as long as the vision doesn't change, I joined for a reason. Like, we can talk about why I joined Brex, but like, as long as the vision hasn't changed, like, throw anything at me. I'm good. I got you. Right. And that's what I believe in. I know that almost everyone here believes that. And I think that should and could be the same for other people that are at their respective company and people are worrying about retention. Right. I often think that some of the best talent joins for a reason. And a lot of that reason is aligned around, like, again, the vision, the value prop, the mission, and that connection to the founders and the leadership team. And so long as there's that connectivity and that connective tissue, I think that everyone can kind of stay afloat.
How do you deal with that though? Like companies, especially startups, like they change direction pretty quickly. Like they pivot plenty, they go in different directions. Yeah. Even Brex, right? The reason you're there is because they essentially had a big pivot. They pivoted one way and then pivoted back a different direction, said, we need to really build out a startup practice and do it the right way. So they hired the best startup person in the Valley, but still, that must have been like a whiplash to a lot of people. It truly was the outside community, and it must have been the same way internally. How do people deal with that internally? And like, how do you keep people energized when you're like, whoa, like, can I trust these founders and leaders who made they thought it was a smart decision, probably gave a lot of justifications in your all hand, like a year and a half ago or whatever, 2 years ago, and like, we're not gonna do startups anymore. And then go in the other direction and say, wait a second, like change direction, we're gonna change back. But trust us, we know exactly what we're doing and we know where we're going. Right? Like that's like a big ask. And by the way, this is every founder, not to pick on Brex.
No. So to fact check it, even though I wasn't here at the time, but I've studied up on it and I'm very well aware of what happened. Brex never pivoted away from startups. It was more of a comms snap.
It was a comms issue, but like comms should also be something that most startups, especially the later stage, get right. And I was actually literally you were gonna say that. I was thinking about this because like, so you there's a PR person who's not on this call, but like who wanted to potentially talk about it. I think like Brex really has PR. So where did those teams mess up? Like where still was the founder? Like that also rolls up, let's say, to a founder. I'm like, hey, like somewhere something got messed up in this messaging. You didn't review it enough. Their team wasn't doing their right job. Whatever it was, and the impression the market had was that Brex was moving away from startups.
For sure. And respectfully, I think both can be true where like Brex never pivoted away from startups. I think that there's just wrong use of words around, like, I think the word small business was way too broad in terms of just like the way it was used. So a comm snafu. And so I'd say like the two both can be true. Brex never pivoted away from startups, but I know that the company and the team and the comms team and all the way up to leadership owns the mistake. And I know that obviously it had its, it had its impact back then when it happened. And so, and it is something that still comes up. Thank you for bringing it up. Appreciate you. It still comes up.
What I'm here for.
And to your point, that was the TechCrunch article that came out right after I joined, which was right after SVB, which was, with SVB, and again, no one wants to see that happen. And I never, in a million years would wish that ever happened. But it did, out of our control, and it opened up the market and created opportunity. And the reason I joined Brex, they called me that same weekend that SVB happened, was because I very much believe in the innovation economy and supporting founders and startups and scaled growth companies, and no better platform, in my opinion, than Brex to do that now. And to your point or comment earlier, it was this opportunity where the market had kind of mixed reactions to, like, you said one thing, even though you didn't mean that, and you're obviously supporting startups, but comms was a little bit of a, it threw us for a curveball, and that, that was our opportunity to kind of course correct and double down on startups and say, like, no, one, we said we didn't mean that. We said it a few times, and now we're actually like going to put more meaning behind it. And we now have this, broader, larger startups org, which is, 30 plus people now, all focused on early stage companies and making sure that we're your first and last banking, card, and spend management partner.
Yep.
And so it is one thing where like, yeah, you're right. Like, things happen. Companies, sometimes have snafus, and then you have to persevere and overcome them. And Brex has done a tremendous job of owning it. And it still comes back, every now and then. And then you have to push ahead and remind people that, we got to own it. But at the same time, like, we're here for you. And this is a part of our mission and value prop. And we're very authentic about it.
How does, or leaders, are using yourself too as an example, as a leader, deal with these big changes, right? So you're talking about the Brex one, right? We just talked about, obviously, but like, frankly, like a much bigger one is the SVB one, where like a company essentially went out of business. I mean, like, I know they're back in name and rebuilding things, but like essentially disappeared overnight. This is a massive, the 20th largest bank or whatever it was, one of the largest banks in the country, essentially disappeared overnight. And it was a huge, just hard to imagine. Really smart people, many of whom you worked with a long time, made decisions that led to a point where they made a big mistake. And obviously, like FRB had the same thing happen, and a lot of the banks made the same mistake. But what are the sorts of things when you think through like good founders where they either try to avoid this or say, you know what, I'm going to take the risk in the swing. And maybe that was SVB's like, hey, look, we're going to go make this big swing at the market that we're in and focus on it. And, sometimes you mess up, like sometimes you do fail, and like, maybe that's okay. Like, what is the right balance there that you've seen with not the FRB, SVB, Brex, and then also, of course, the founders you've worked with over the years?
Yeah, I mean, let me try and answer that in a different way, because the folks that were at the helm of SVB were not the founders.
They were well-paid executives, though, who theoretically knew the market.
They were well-paid executives, and I would say this, just to to answer this SVB question real quickly, is like, I mean, no one's written the book yet.
I'm waiting for the Netflix special.
I mean, it's got to come, and I don't know how accurate it will be, and I'm not saying I know everything, but I have an opinion, and like, I think that, a perfect storm. I mean, like, there are some things that were completely avoidable on their end, which might be kind of why you said big swings, right? And just like a perfect storm of like the right other things, Twitter and a few other things that just kind of really enable what I think is like a black swan event to happen. And it was just bad decision, bad luck.
Yeah.
I think.
Are there ways that you think the best founders avoid bad luck? Sure. But sometimes more bad luck happens to some people than others. And look, maybe right. SVB didn't have, like, they had a 30-year run of incredible profitability, success. They rose right along with Silicon Valley itself, which is also sort of luck for being in the right place at the right time. But where does that work out when, once again, you think through all these founders you've worked with? Luck? I mean, was Brex lucky? They saw the market at the right time. They were there early to say, hey, we can be a neobank and do this a different way. Was that luck or skill or combination?
I mean, I am one of many opinions. I think that some of the biggest and best outcomes has a combination of luck, obviously metal with skill and timing. I think timing, skill, and luck are like the three ingredients that really can help, propel things forward. And I think, to the question, like back to SVB, I think, especially with the proliferation in fintech, like, I think it was time for SVB to, now again, SVB is back. I'm going to give them full credit. They're back. But it was time for something in the market to happen to open the door for others. SVB had very much a monopoly, both on just like market share and on talent. And, the one thing that people don't talk about now as often is like, there are a lot of great people at SVB that are now at many.
Yeah, it's spread all around.
And I can't wait to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, again, this whole space, financial services that supports the innovation economy, if you just want to focus on tech for a bit, there's so much opportunity. I still think we're early innings. And I think just, what happened with SVB effectively opened the door for, a more level playing field across the board. And there are a number of us, in addition to Brex, that are out there all vying for the prize.
There are a lot actually out there right now, and which is great. Look, if you're a startup, it's a fantastic time to be a startup when it comes to your banking relationships and everything else. Like, there's a lot of folks vying for your business. So it is a great place to be. Going back to one of the things you brought up really, really early on was about how sort of the talent at why people decided to go to SVB. And I would love to go back to that and talk through like what that looked like and why people would make that decision and how that applies to people making a decision to go to any sort of business in general. Like, when you think through like many people would say, I would never want to go to a big bank, sort of like SVB. I mean, it wasn't obviously the big of a bank, but a big bank like SVB. Whereas a lot of people, you obviously made that decision yourself in your career. And if I recall, I think I saw somewhere like your dad was actually at SVB back in the day too. So maybe it was like a family thing for you and it's just like a natural path. But like, what was that decision to go and spend 17 years of your career at a sort of large-ish bank versus going to any of the startups? Like you saw could have gone to Coinbase when they were doing their seed. Like, gosh, what if you went to Coinbase then? Like, do you regret that? It's just not your personality. What does that look like for people who get hired and go to a bank versus other places?
I love the question. So you brought up, so my dad worked at SVB in the early 90s. I used to do my homework as a kid when I was very young and the kitchen and the early SVB offices. And then my dad got recruited out from SVB to join a Singaporean venture fund. And they ultimately started a venture firm. And so by the time I went through like elementary, junior high, and high school, I was like, all I knew was Silicon Valley, tech, finance, and venture. Like that was just like my very narrow world.
I worry for my own children, and for your kids, what are they gonna, when they grow up bigger, that's what their world's gonna be too in its own way. So what does that mean for them? But anyways, I mean, maybe it's a good thing, right? Look at both of us, but at the same time, like there's its own challenges there too. So anyways, continue on.
Exactly. So like I grew up with that, and and then so I knew I had to go to college locally. At least that was just my feeling, was like, I don't want to leave this. I've got somewhat of a network. This is where everything happens. I didn't get to Stanford.
Some people would like to say the other side. I've been in this too deeply. I need to like get perspective and go outside of it.
I know, and maybe I'm a bit of a creature of habit. Like like one of my bigger regrets in life is just I never like went to college out of state. And if I could do it all over again, like live in New York for a couple of years, like I never did that. And I know a lot of people that have done that were like, that's like the best 2 years of their life, right? I never did that. Never lived in Manhattan. But like going back to it, it's like, to kind of fast forward, like I stayed local. I went to Santa Clara, loved it. I went to a great high school out here, but like I was too lazy to take the SAT choose, so I didn't apply to any of the California state schools. Otherwise, I should have feel like I would have tried to, or should have gone to like Berkeley or UCLA. But loved Santa Clara, had a great time there. Interned at SVB while I was in college, and then I graduated a little after 9/11. Rest in peace. And it wasn't easy at all to find a job. You and I are the same age, so you know exactly.
Yeah, that was a scary time. I mean, obviously, scary time from a career perspective, but also with just what was happening geopolitically. I mean, like,
it was a weird time. And so, I was like, what do I do? And my dad was like, I mean, you have an internship from SVB. SVB would be the best kind of like mini MBA you're ever going to get in terms of understanding like tech and venture and finance. So you should go do that. So I applied to SVB, had a couple offers, joined. And my whole intent was like, and I'm going to get to the point to answer your question in a second. My whole intent was, I don't really believe that everyone really, really, really knows what they want to do right when they graduate college. Like you just kind of like find something directionally accurate that like helps you pay the bills so you can like pay rent, have some beer money, and like live life. And then you hope that you like did something in a place where, or you're in a space where like, opportunities that really excite you can kind of find you. And so if you go down that path, like my first job at SVB was in our asset-based lending group. And you'll laugh at this because it's so far from where I am right now. But like I was working with a bunch of different companies, like some tech tangentially tech related. And, it was like, invoice financing. And so like they would have, they would have an invoice. It wouldn't be payable for like 90 days. And then it was my job to like call the vendor and like say like, you good? You're going to pay this? Okay, great. And then I would lend them, the customer, like 80% of the value of the invoice, and then make sure like the invoice got paid. And that way, like people got some, some runway ahead of.
Which now has been like, there's a startup that does that now. So,
Yeah, there's a startup that does it now. Like, again, I used to call like, hi, it's Jason Mok from Silicon Valley Bank on behalf of, Brex, blah, blah, blah. I want to call and verify invoice number 472. Great. And I was like, can you fax me a copy? This was way back in the day. And like the point of all that is like, I was good at the job. I wasn't great at it. And the reason I wasn't great at it is because I honestly didn't find any like interest or passion behind it. I was like, this is not me. Like, I came here to like learn tech and lend and blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't have any interest in like this type of lending, invoice financing, or the companies that need invoice financing. Like, I'm like, no, I think we're good. So I would give myself like a B, and I was kind of like middle of the pack performer, but I got recruited out to the venture team because like that's where my interest lied. And then from there, like I think, I'd say like you looked at my resume and it's like my career took off. And that's because like, and this is what I tell everyone that solicits career advice. But like, you may not know early on, but at some point you have to really align around like what gets you ticking, what motivates you, and then what are your superpowers. And like I was and still am like so interested in venture and like the history of venture capital and what makes venture tick and the relationship between venture and startup companies and how venture kind of permeates from pre-seed all the way to growth through IPO. And like, I just, everything in that, like I was a student of it. And it just made me so much more passionate about every job I then did at SVB. Like I was in our venture group, kind of doing the banking and the lending to venture firms for 5 years. And I kind of grew within that group. And then I got recruited to the early stage team to do like banking and venture debt and all that stuff. Right. And so like, I love the venture side. And then they recruited me over like, you're really good with people here. I think you'd be great with people over here. And I knew about the startup scene. I wanted to get more ingrained. But funny enough, I'll tell you this, like I would argue like I was probably one of the most active and visible people like within SVB, like externally.
For sure.
In the, like,
you went to like every event because I was going to every event and you were always there. So,
and for me, a lot of it at the time was like, I want to get out, meet people and learn. And I, at the time was like, I'm 28, don't have many other responsibilities. I live in San Francisco. I have the time to do these things and I likely won't have the time to do these things as much down the road. And so I just put myself out there and I fell in love with connecting with people, connecting people, learning about people and learning all about the startup industry and meeting new founders. And along the way, I met some really amazing founders. I learned how to pull dinners together, events, all these things. And like, it just all came where like, I just like found what I found, I felt was like my calling. And I always tell people like, keep doing you and the right people will find you. And then I was recruited out by A16Z because they asked around, it was Jeff Jordan and Martin Casado who like asked around and said like, who's one of the most connected bankers around to the startup ecosystem. And fortunately, my name came up. And like, I wasn't doing that to ultimately get recruited out, right? I was doing that because that's
what made you finally decide to go to A16? Like, given 17 years at SVB, working with some of the best startups out there, you probably had a million opportunities to be recruited out before A16. Why? What changed in your career, or what made you decide at that point that you wanted to make the move?
Yeah. This was end of 2019.
And why did you stay as long as you did?
You know,
I mean, conversely, at like no one stays for 17 years at any company. I don't know anybody else who's stayed at a company that long. Anybody our age.
It's interesting. You see a lot of people still at SVB that are still there that have out tenured me. SVB is one of those places where like you don't leave. What's interesting as I reflect back on it is like I never interviewed outside of SVB up until A16Z. A16Z was the first time I interviewed in 16 and a half years. It's insane. I did have recruiters reach out to me, and like honestly at the time at SVB, my goal was to, I was very driven to like I bled blue. Like I was like, I want to stay with SVB as long as I can, as long as they'll have me and like scale into like an even further leadership position and have an amazing run. So I was never looking. And I always, joked with myself, like if I was ever going to leave, I was going to get recruited out by like, a top 5 something that would never, like I could never pass up. And again, I say this less because of SVB or A16Z, but more because you're asking like, what is it in someone's career? I just think you need to go ahead and align your superpowers or create opportunity for you to figure out what your superpowers are. And for people to then like be able to freely exercise that and do that in their daily job, whether that's connecting with people, whether that's coding, whether that's sales, whatever that may be, but like just align your superpowers. And I say this all the time, like you need to put yourself in the best position for the best things to happen to you. And people will notice you and you will have doors open. And so to answer your question, the timing just felt right. Like I had always a tremendous amount of respect for A16Z as a firm. The opportunity to come in and run the corporate development team at the time was one where I was going to learn a ton. And it just felt like the right next step function in my career. And everyone that I met and spent time with and interviewed with at A16Z was amazing. And I knew I had a ton to learn from. And so it just felt right. Now, I will tell you that, like, yeah, I left SVB and it was tough and I had a ton of friendships there, but none of those friendships ever left and died. I was still very close to a lot of people there too. So it just felt
When
like
you
the
think
right
through,
thing.
like, I mean, in a sense, like, you're an entrepreneur of your own career. And you actually mentioned all the things you mentioned about like what leads to a successful career is actually stuff that people would say leads to a successful business too. Like all those same things, like being there, being in the playing field, getting all that those steps. What are things still like to talk yourself up? Don't be too embarrassed, but like, look, you still stand out a lot more than a lot of other people, right? You're in these positions compared to people who you work with. Who I remember even working with you back at SVB years and years and years ago. You're where you are today and they aren't. Like, just like a successful company, there's millions, or maybe not millions, thousands and thousands of dead companies. And thanks to thousands and thousands of founders who were here when you and I started our careers, they aren't in Silicon Valley anymore. And you and I are still pushing it forward. What is the difference there? Is it that made you stand out?
That's a great question. And I know you said, don't be too humble. I'd say two things that really come to mind for me right now. One is, I don't know if I ever will feel like my mission is complete, but I have this just like burning desire and drive in me to be around success and to enable success and to have impact and also to be successful. And that comes from like a very authentic place of like, I've just been around so many founders and startups and scaled companies that I am addicted to helping. I'm addicted to being an impact player. I'm addicted to being in the room, and I'm addicted to playing a role that can help affect change and change trajectory. And I think this, like, I think a lot of people would echo with that sentiment, but like that's something for me that like has never changed, which is, why I've probably chosen to gratefully have the opportunities that I've had in my career and in those roles, because they, I think, are very impactful roles. And then the other, I would say, for me is like, I care very deeply about my friendships and my network. I've got a really decent memory. I feel well connected and I treasure that. And I think that like, I don't take it for granted. And I think that one, that's a lot of evenings out in San Francisco and elsewhere. But two, that's just a lot of like, I care to understand people, to meet people, to help people, to lean on people, and to have a network of advocates who can help just move life forward. And a lot of these relationships have turned into like personal friendships too. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And the fact that like you and I have known each other for this long, and you and I can not see each other for a while and then reconnect quickly, and then here I am on your podcast, and I appreciate that. And I think that just, it goes, in my opinion, it goes a long way of saying like, my bet and my hope is that I've built a lot more authentic relationships over the years than I actually really know. And I'm excited to see how all that compounds over years. But I think, the network keeps me here, and it's something that keeps me afloat.
So you're, in some ways, I mean, I describe a lot of your career, and we should spend some time talking about this. I have a few other questions I want to get to as well, but like, you're kind of the consummate like relationship builder. Like, you are like the relationship person, is sort of like, I would say in some ways your skill set. It's like, I build great relationships and I remember that about people. Are there tips and tricks that you do to just like, what's Jason's secret to remembering that those facts and information that make people feel like, oh, Jason saw me and remembered that about me? Do you write all this down? Do you have your little Rolodex?
I do not have a personal CRM now. I don't take notes. I don't have a personal CRM. I don't use Clay or, Affinity, at least for myself. I just have a really good memory and a knack for remembering things. But, I would say that I think the thing that rings true, and I actually tell this a lot to my teammates and whatnot, is like, if one believes that I'm decent at building relationships, then my advice would be, and this sounds so basic, but to be yourself. Because I think some of the worst people to engage with are the people that try too hard. And it's just such as a massive turnoff. And I think relationships are built not just through good times, but also through tough conversations, right? Like I will take Coinbase, Postmates, take your brother and sister's company, Third Love, and I can list like there weren't just good times when I had to have conversations on SUV. There were also really difficult times, right? And I think if you're trying to play it up and schmooze and, not truly be authentic, but like kind of like, sugarcoat stuff when you're having tough conversations, then you're not in a position to build a relationship. You just got to be
Yeah.
yourself. You got to have a backbone. And I think people want to deal with real people who are interesting, intelligent, and authentic. And so it's about being a real person and playing the long game. I think a lot of people feel and push to build a relationship, in the first two interactions. And if you're trying to, like, I think it's weird to like try and build a
Totally.
relationship, right? Like just the notion of like, Adam, I look forward to like meeting you and I want to build a relationship. It's like, or we could just work together and hopefully things organically come out of that. And so I'd say don't force it, be yourself and, lean in, be helpful, but have a backbone and always do what's right by them and you and your org. And I think through that, people will build trust in you, see you as reliable and consistent, and then as a result, lean on you. And over time, you will have naturally and organically.
Does that lead? I mean, one of the things that I think you do really well in is probably being authentic in a sense, like you're very open about, on like your personal struggles and things you've been through and that sort of stuff. And like that humanizes you. Whereas I think there's a lot of founders as an example who you say, how are you doing? And you're like, dude, we're fucking crushing it. And I'm like, okay, come on. That's like utter bullshit. Like you're not like there's like a million things you're stressing about right now that you're not talking about. Like what are the real struggles? What's going on? What keeps you up at night?
Yeah.
And I will say, like, to your credit, like I think you're very open about some of these things. Like, man, like things are not perfect. Like you're this amazing resume, but like doesn't mean your life is perfect in every way. And like there's probably things right now you're struggling with even at work. And you're like not always perfect about. And like that, to your credit, is something you think you are open with, but maybe a lot of people are not.
Yep. I appreciate you asking that. I like anyone that knows me, whether it's personally or professionally, and especially, those that have worked with me, like I lead with vulnerability. Like you'll get to know me and everything that's going on with me within the first 10 minutes of hanging out. And I do that because to me, and you said it well, like I like to humanize every conversation. I like to level the playing field. And it's not because I'm trying to actually like, I'm not trying to tell you my dirt to get your dirt. It's because I actually like want to open up and have an open, frank conversation because like you, I've had so many of these conversations in my life that no one has time for like a very high level, surface level conversation that ends up with, zero benefit to anyone. And so I lead with vulnerability. I think it's interesting. I think it's a key piece and component of me that I love putting myself out there, and I can then tell who wants to reciprocate, about whether they do or not. But it's my way of extending an olive branch and saying like I want to find a way to get to know you, and this is me offering up.
So to come back to when you were mentioning, like I want to talk really briefly about like when you think through people who decide to go to a startup or to a company like SVB, things like that, when you're crafting the entrepreneur of your own career, how do you decide? Do I go to an SVB? Do I not go? Do I go to a startup? Do I go to Brex? What are those decisions that people make that you recommend they think through?
Yeah. I find this interesting, but it's like, I've shared for people who solicit career advice to say like, don't start where you want to end up. Like I look at everything as like building blocks, right? So like, if you want to get into venture as an example, like I think it's kind of, this is my bias. Like I think it's kind of off to go ahead and like graduate and say like, I find venture capital interesting. I want to jump into venture. It's like, okay, cool. What industry? Why? Like, not everyone, but a lot of people can write a memo and put them all together, and then like.
But it's like saying, but you have no taste. You still have no taste, and that's the issue, frankly. You have no taste, even if you put them all together.
So the way I would answer that question is like, what interests you? Deep tech, climate, bio, fintech. Great. What kinds of companies? Go get a job understanding how to do things. So like, I don't know that everyone really knows ultimately what they want to do. Some people are like gung-ho, like I want to be an investor, I want to be a founder or whatever. But I think like, I look at it as like collecting skills along the way. Right. And so like talking about myself for a second, I want to be as well-rounded as possible. And I would even argue, for sake of being vulnerable, that I at SVB I think I had a successful run at SVB, and I do understand finance and banking and lending, I'd say like exceedingly well. But like my reputation was relationship management. And over time, I thought that's great. And I may always be known as that. And that's not a terrible thing. But I know that I have so much more to offer. And I'd love to go and build my skill set and strengthen them even further to offset that and make sure that I am more well-rounded. And so obviously I spent time at A16Z to do a lot of other things that weren't as focused on relationship management that I think helped further round out my skill set. And then coming to Brex, it was this opportunity to say like, look, I spent 20 years sitting on the other side of the table with founders, giving them advice, perspective, opening up my Rolodex. I'm like, here's how I can be helpful. Here's what you should do. This is what I've seen other people do. And now I have the opportunity to like literally sit inside a company where I feel like I've great perspective on what's happening here at Brex because I lived a lot of it at SVB. And I've seen a lot of what companies at this scale do at A16Z. And I can sit in here and, get my own version of some element of operating experience to further round out my skill set because it's something I didn't have. And so I personally like to do things that kind of, I like to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and do things that I haven't done before. And I think that these will then open up new doors down the road.
So I set you up a little bit with this next question though, unfortunately, which is, so why have you never founded your own company? Speaking of being uncomfortable.
Going back to superpowers, I don't think that would be a superpower of mine. If I wake up one day and I have this amazing idea that, I see, maybe I'm making this up right now, but like, I think when you found a company, you have to be super intentional. And like, I think there are some people out there like, I want to start a company, any company. I don't know what company, and I'm going to sit here and like, fiddle around in a WeWork for 6 months trying to think of like what the idea is, right? That could be a strategy. That's not me. I think there are other strategies where, and again, especially I'm 20 years into my career, like it would have to be something that I noticed and saw at my time from SVB to A16 to now Brex, and it's now becoming even more clear at Brex. And it's an opportunity at Brex that Brex is choosing not to pursue that I think is an amazing opportunity and has a ton of TAM, right? And then I know that I am very well suited to go and do that. And there are other people here at Brex that believe in that. And then I can go ahead and recruit them out too. And I'm going to like, that would be like, that's how the story would go. And I don't see that right now. And I don't foresee that. And it's just not a thing that I think is a stepping stone or superpower for me because I'm so aligned with the vision.
Look, I appreciate that. There's a lot of people I think who found companies who probably shouldn't be. They do it because they think it's cool. They think it's the interesting thing to do. That's exciting. It's what everyone's doing, whatever it is. Or it's like, oh, I can call myself CEO of a company of one. Like, okay, congrats CEO. And I think a lot of people get sold in that. So credit to you for having that perspective. I want to talk briefly about, once again, going back to being like this consummate networker. You are someone who is just this expert at business development, building partnerships, building relationships. What are the secrets to that? How do the companies do a really good job of it? And then also, how do they make sure they get the right outcomes from it? Like, what does doing great BD and partnerships mean and look like? And then how do you measure those outcomes, either for what you're doing at Brex, but what you've done throughout your career? What does that actually mean? Like, how can people emulate that, or what are the lessons you've learned?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question, but I'll share a few things kind of like little high level. One is, I think the most, one of the most important things is, especially like when you're spinning up a BD partnership motion, is like focus, right? I think there's a common knack to want to go out and like go to every conference, talk to everyone, and have 150 different relationships that might be referring in one or two opportunities. And it's very surface level, and you both don't know each other's business or respective business, as well as you should. One, in order to BD well, you have to understand your business like inside out. And then two, in order to do then it exceedingly well, is like you have to have actual focus on narrowing that scope to like do 1 to 2 to 3 like partnerships, synergies, anything in that nature, like exceedingly well. Like I personally believe like some of the best partnerships and a lot of the best BD is done through like, like again, super laser focus, very narrow aperture, and nailing one thing and getting a ton out of that one thing, whether like on our end of it, like if it's referrals, if it's GMB, like whatever that may be, versus, shotgun approach and having, a bunch of hands in a bunch of different pots, because you have no idea what's going on, and it's really hard to kind of measure success in. And so here we're really, really focused on and intentional on where we spend time and whether we believe there's mutual leverage. The second piece is it's got to be bilateral and it's got to be mutual. Like no good relationship is ever one-sided. And so it's about understanding who's in your ecosystem, understanding where they have relationships, and then aligning yourself. Again, narrow set, narrow focus with a key set of relationships, and aligning to then like know that you're going to be vulnerable and you're going to have to give some stuff up. But how do you find the 1 + 1 = 3 in that? And I think, again, there are a lot of BD partnerships people out there that I think just like, have the business card, they run out to every event, and they just splatter name and email address everywhere. And, if I max out calls and meetings, that ultimately will drive volume. And I think that's a very scattered.
So how do you make sure you're aligning? I mean, or actually maybe the question is like, do you think about incentives and incentive alignment? So I'll give you an example, right? So for Levy, right, we think partnerships with obviously banks like Brex, but also with venture capital firms is a great way to go for us, because like they're a great leverage point for us. At the same time, like I can't pay a referral fee to any VC firm that's going to give two shits about whatever I pay, no matter what price I pay. They almost don't care. It's not how they work. So how do I align my incentives to make them energized and interested in pushing Levy to their customers? Same thing, let's say with Brex. Like, how do you align those incentives with all your different partners properly to incentivize action in quality outcomes?
Yeah. So two things. So one, and it's a great example because, like, again, I think no one's going to pay a VC firm, and VC firm's not going to pay anyone. And we would fall in the same boat as Levy in that regard. So I'd say, like, look, there's two layers to it, right? There's, what we would call, what everyone calls like long tail partnerships, right? Where like you're either it's handshakes, it's friends, it's favors, or there's maybe like some rev share component, right? And it's few and far in between. And like those are just relationships on like autopilot mode, right? And like hopefully stuff comes through there. And I don't have a perfect percentage on that, right? Like you need those because I think those help you find ultimately like who are the right actual true partners, strategic partners that you really should align with. And then, I think like we use the term here, embedded finance, right? And so that it's a term everywhere in fintech, but like we internalize it very deeply because like, yes, are VC firms for Brex a meaningful referral channel? Absolutely. Are other folks within the stack, whether you think about like insurance or ERP, yes, everything is super meaningful. But like, where is the true synergy? And you think about, when do people make a decision to switch to your product? Who else is influencing that decision? Timing of that decision, and then also the sequencing of like, when someone's going to go ahead and choose your product versus other products, and then surrounding yourself. And that's why I go back to ecosystem. Like, where's the synergy, right? Like, where's the synergy, and where are you embedded or someone embedded in your own respective success, and where there are opportunities to embed yourself, white label, or kind of in the flow, where like I think a lot of the more amazing BD partnership opportunities lie. And so I think it's going a step or two beyond and getting really granular about how do you make yourself a part of the natural sequence or a part of the, or a part
and
of
is
the
that,
solution.
are you like offering, are you like contacting these folks and are like building really, like, are you taking them out to, it's like, do you think in-person drink?
I'll give you a great example. It's like a good example on the Brex side could be something like, hey, HRIS partner, like clearly you, I'm making this up completely. Like, hey, HRIS partner, clearly you over the years are looking to go ahead and like make sure that you have more stickiness with all of your customer base and whatnot. And, like, are you doing anything to innovate on, the employee experience, like paying out directly to your to your customers' employees, like, on different things related to the system, blah, blah, blah. Like, are you doing anything different? Is there anything interesting there? And if not, do you have a spend management partner that you're talking to? And if not, like Brex would be a great person to complement, or a great company to complement you in that regard, because we're actually seeing that HRIS and fintech and payments are like actually more closely related now. And conversely, like we have a solution where we can kind of embed, like I'm making this up, but like it's stuff like that where it's like there's that level of depth of a relationship. And then there's the like, hey, HRIS company, it was great to meet you at an event. Why don't we do some co-marketing together? Why don't we do some sequencing together? And why don't we do like a quarterly dinner in some of your key hubs and invite our mutual clients and share like prospecting lists? Like, right? Like you can go at it at different depths of a layer, and yeah, and I think both are fine. But I think some of the most interesting BD and some of the more, meaningful ROI driven partnerships come from, a like
So a more
truly
unique
embedded
like
nature.
tie-in that's like, so even like speaking with VCs, like there's not tie-ins, they don't have a product per se. So is it building that relationship and keeping things warm on a regular basis and like pinging them, going out to coffee? Like is it still like a people-driven business to do BD really well?
I think that's a I mean, like, again, I think the VC channel is a people-driven business that's more in our opinion around like brand awareness and credibility. Like my hope, just openly sharing, like for ourselves on the VC channel, is that VCs are aware that Brex, they're aware of Brex, they're aware of what Brex offers, and that they would say positive things if solicited by a founder about Brex, right? Like, and I think that's true for any product, right? And so that's why you gotta
Absolutely.
maintain that channel, right? But I don't think anyone's gonna have like any like key partnerships with any. There's always just too much portfolio conflict risk and whatnot. So the VC channel is a good example in some regards, and then others like a lot of it is exactly that: co-marketing, partner marketing events, sharing prospecting lists, the balance of trade, referrals both ways. And then there's like embedded tech. And I think embedded tech is where things get really interesting.
It's a real dance. So one question I like to ask, right? Kind of two questions I want to ask near the end of this. Like one is when you think through like you as an entrepreneur for your own career, but also just generally for entrepreneurs in general, how do you think through like a work-life balance? Is there such a thing as a work-life balance? How do you handle that? Right? You've had a very successful career. What is that?
Yeah.
What does that look like for the best folks?
Yeah. I got to quote him. Him, Albert Martinez, SVB, love you. I always used to ask him this question. He was one of my managers as I was enjoying SVB, and he calls it work-life equilibrium, because balance means 50 and it's never 50-50. And you might be some days 80-20, work and life, and then obviously it can flip. And so my kids are 6 and 4. I've got a busy home life as well. And the way I think about it is I time box. And so I have my calendar blocked in the mornings from 7:45 to 9 to breakfast and drop off, right? And then, on certain days I do pick up, and, I have that time boxed. And then I have that time box from pickup through dinner and bath time. And then I work later. So like, any parent listening, like I send emails at 10, like my most productive hours, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m. And I can operate just fine on 5.5 hours sleep.
Impressive, I guess. So, that mindset's changing a little bit, but I'm still impressed if someone's able to function well on that. That's great.
My Oura ring tells me otherwise, but no, like I don't think there's a perfect answer, right? Because I think like you want, hopefully, like you want to be, the best co-parent and parent that you can be, and partner, and you want to be the best of everything you can be at home at the same time. Like we all have drive, and so I think it's to each your own. Everyone's got a different setup, but I think time boxing is helpful, because you just never want to be in a place where you're being shitty at both, right? You got to be all on as a parent, and like people respect that, or all on with work, and your kids are asleep, or they understand that right now is a little bit of time.
No, I agree with all that. My last question that I always end on: if there's a single piece of advice that you would give to every entrepreneur, or maybe even in your case, someone who wants to just have a really long, successful career and be an entrepreneur for themselves, what is that piece of advice?
Strive to understand your superpowers, embrace your superpowers, and also embrace your areas of growth, and surround yourself with people who complement your areas of growth, because you can't do everything. You can't be everything. And so I like to believe that I have confidence in what my superpowers are, and I definitely own it on areas where I'm like, that's not my area of expertise. and I'm going to bring in this person or partner with this person to collaborate on that, because again, we
100%.
win as a team. And so I hope that everyone realizes, like, there's not any one human being in this world that's great at everything. And so know your superpower and leverage people around.
Totally agree. Love that. Jason, how can people find you if they want to get in touch, learn more about what you've done, how you've done things, or chat? Do a deal, partnership with you.
Add me on LinkedIn, or my email is mok, MOK@brex.com.
Love it. Jason, thank you so much for the time. It is one of our most precious things. So I appreciate it completely.
Yeah. Cheers to you and the family. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.